Ladies and gentlemen, I'm DJ Alex. This is a special report from Hunky Vape. Yesterday in the news, especially in the end of the news, I was talking about how kind of fed up with all the infighting and all the bad news regarding all the vaping situation out there and all the fighting that's going on constantly, trying to get our fair share and our fair shake at this whole thing. And then yesterday, I also came across an article in Filter Mag. It was titled Burning Issues, A Call to Liberate Vapes and Vapers. And it just sounded like somebody's actually telling the truth about this for once. Burning Issues, the global state of tobacco harm reduction, talking about renaming it, talking about calling it safer nicotine products. And you look at the article and you read into it and you find out that there's somebody familiar. There's somebody they're talking about that in this report that we've come across before. It's Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg. The major barrier is philanthrocapitalists, billionaires like Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg. So this report definitely focuses on telling the truth. And they're not afraid to name names. It said in the report, and it said in the article we read yesterday in Filter Mag, that the author, Harry Shapiro, has penned a vital cutting-edge document that isn't afraid to name names or to unapologetically defend tobacco harm reduction and the right to health. The right to health. Something so fundamental. And they're defending it in this paper. So I think it deserves a little more attention. And that's where we're at today. Today we're going to take a look at this actual report that was published. Yep. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. Here we are. This is the same place we were yesterday. Filtermag.org, Burning Issues, Tobacco Harm Reduction. Tobacco harm reduction is good public health and health promotion. Starting with the people who matter. Smokers and those who have chosen alternatives. Like me. So, how about we take an actual closer look at this? What is this paper that they're talking about in this article? Burning Issues. The global state of tobacco harm reduction. I downloaded and I read the PDF. And it's not a short paper. It's over 150 pages long. So it took a while. But I could not believe the content that was included in the single document. Since I quit smoking over a year ago, almost a year and a half ago now, I've constantly been reading scientific papers. I've constantly been reading journals, reading articles, and following the news and digging for the news. Because when you go to search on Google, you should be able to easily find what you're looking for. Especially when you narrow the search results down and you tell them, I only want to see what was published in the last 24 hours. Or I only want to see what's published in the last week. It should give you the search results based on what was actually put onto the face of the earth, onto the internet within the last 24 hours or the last week. And constantly I keep hearing and reading and seeing articles about Avali. There hasn't been a single Avali case in God knows how long. But yet the information is being suppressed and I don't understand why. Well, after reading Burning Issues, the global state of tobacco harm reduction, I'm getting to see a much clearer picture now of what's going on. Yeah. Citizens United in the United States? Money is free speech? Yeah, it's becoming quite clear what the problem is. So how about we just go through the executive summary? For those of you that are not familiar with academic papers, those of you that are not familiar with professional journals, when somebody publishes something, you have to create an executive summary. And just like the name implies, it's meant for the executive who doesn't have the time to read the entire book. It's meant for the executive who doesn't have time to read the entire report. This is a synopsis of the entire book. And we're going to cover that today. I'm going to go through this, and you can formulate your own opinion, because you obviously know what mine's going to be. But here's the executive summary for Burning Issues, the Global State of Tobacco Harm Reduction 2020. The central theme of this report, enshrined in many international treaties, is the universal right to health, including for those who, for whatever reason, continue to engage in risky behaviors. Harm reduction refers to a range of pragmatic policies, regulations, and actions which either reduce health risks by providing safer forms of products or substances, or encourage less risky behaviors. Harm reduction does not focus primarily on the eradication of products or behaviors. The humane response instead is to reduce the risks, thereby enabling people to survive and live better. In this case, through access to safer nicotine products, otherwise known as SNP, aimed at encouraging people to switch away from cigarettes, one of the most dangerous ways of consuming nicotine. What? I have goosebumps. Somebody's telling the truth. Somebody's not judging you for your life choices and allowing you a product that is safer to consume nicotine because you're a nicotine addict. You used to be a nicotine addict. You used to be a cigarette smoker. Somebody that's not demonizing you for your life choices. Everybody makes life choices. Everybody makes bad life choices, especially when you're young and you're experimenting. Why shouldn't you have a safer alternative? Let's continue. The global smoking problem continues unabated, but there are glimmers of hope in some countries. The World Health Organization has not revised downwards its estimate that 1 billion lives could be lost to smoking-related disease by the end of the century. This is equivalent to the combined populations of Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, all dying from COVID-19. And while daily adult smoking levels have fallen across the world, the rates of decline have slowed in some countries. In others, the numbers of smokers have increased, often due to population growth. The highest reported levels of smoking occur mainly, but not exclusively, in low and middle income countries, which consequently shoulder the heaviest burden of disease and mortality. There are 22 countries where 30% or more of the overall adult population are current smokers. These countries include Pacific Islands, such as Kiribati and the Solomon Islands, several European countries, including Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, Latvia, Cyprus, Lebanon, and in the Middle East, and Chile in South America. The estimated total number of smokers globally is 1.1 billion. And that's been static, the same number as in 2000, and it's predicted to be the same number in 2025, disproportionately affecting poor and marginalized groups, especially in low and middle income countries. The World Health Organization continues to express concern that the unabated levels of smoking will undermine attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals and ensure that the 2030 targets at reduced levels of non-communicable disease will be missed. Clearly, then, traditional tobacco control interventions elaborated in the World Health Organization framework, Convention on Tobacco Control, are not enough. Tobacco harm reduction policies, therefore, should be regarded as complementary rather than inimical to reducing the global death and disease from smoking. The glimmer of hope is that some countries have taken a more inclusive approach to tobacco harm reduction as part of their overall strategy towards a smoke-free world. Wow. Somebody comprehensively putting all of this information into one document? New product development. Talking about technology and how it correlates to tobacco harm reduction. Product innovation continues to offer a wide choice to adult consumers looking to avoid smoking. The origins of vaping lay outside the orbit of tobacco multinationals, and the creative disruption this caused was underlined by the success of Juul, which since 2018 rapidly overtook its rivals. Some of Juul's earlier marketing to the youth, adults, end of the smoking market clearly caused controversy, but the product delivered a nicotine experience sought by many in the wider market of adult consumers. Wow. Let's continue. Vaping devices, already discreet and easy to use, are becoming technologically more sophisticated. Yeah. Making the term e-cigarette increasingly redundant. More companies are involved in developing heated tobacco products, while new non-tobacco nicotine products are also coming to the market. The e-juice that I use in my vape is not a tobacco product because it contains absolutely zero derivatives of tobacco. Because it's 0 milligram juice, the only ingredients in this is vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol, and flavoring. That's why I do it, because it's the flavor that got me to quit smoking. But the global number of safer nicotine product users remains small. Look at the illustration that they have for smokers. 1.1 billion smokers. And look at the illustration they have for vapers. 68 million vapers compared to 1.1 billion? That's less than 10%. Despite a more globally hostile environment for tobacco harm reduction, our exclusive survey of global prevalence of safer nicotine product estimates that the overall figure stands at approximately 98 million, of whom 68 million are vapers. While from a public health perspective this is good news, it still means that after more than a decade of product availability, there are only 9 users of safer nicotine products for every 100 smokers. Wow. After a decade of having electronic nicotine delivery systems, it's less than 10% of the marketplace? It's only overtaken 10% of the smokers in the world? Something that saves lives, extends people's lives, and after 10 years, only 9% of smokers who converted to modern technology devices for their nicotine needs? What is happening in different countries? This could be interesting. The highest number of vapers live in the United States, China, the Russian Federation, United Kingdom, France, Japan, Germany, and Mexico. Japan has the highest number of heated tobacco product users, while Sweden and the U.S. have the highest number of snus consumers. The use of safer nicotine products is holding up in countries such as the UK, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and Japan. Although in the latter countries, sales of heated tobacco products have slackened, possibly due to the number of early young adopters reaching saturation point. The evidence confirms that safer nicotine products are just that, safer than smoking. There is no such thing as absolute safety, but the newer SNP have been in wide circulation for more than a decade, with accumulated evidence that they are much less risky than combustibles. Certainly, since 2018, no robust evidence has emerged to throw doubt on the widely quoted conclusion of Public Health England that vaping is at least 95% less risky than smoking, and that emissions pose a negligible hazard to bystanders. Similarly, the relative safety record of Swedish-style snus and U.S. smokeless products is unchanged from 2018. Moreover, there is growing evidence that the use of SNP is more effective for smoking cessation than nicotine replacement therapy. This means over-interpretation of the precautionary principle, the exercise of caution in the face of potentially harmful innovation, relating to health advice and regulation concerning safer nicotine products is no longer tenable. Wow. That's remarkable. I'm at a loss for words. They're actually talking about this comprehensively and addressing the reality from a truly scientific point of view. Other concerns have been raised about the use of safer nicotine products. Misleading data from the U.S. promoted the idea that Juul was responsible for an epidemic of vaping among young people through the marketing of child-friendly flavors, whereas more sober evaluations demonstrated that use was very broadly defined, covering experimentation and much rarer daily use. Lung injury and deaths in the United States were quickly determined by consumers and local health authorities as opposed to U.S. federal agencies to be caused by the vaping of illicit THC liquid, not industry standard nicotine liquids. More truth. Oh. Making me cry because I'm so happy. After decades of tobacco research which failed to demonstrate adverse effects of nicotine on the developing brain, recent claims to this effect about vaping are not credible. Failing to demonstrate a gateway effect from vaping to smoking, anti-tobacco harm reduction campaigners majored on nicotine addiction. However, given the lack of evidence about the physical and psychological harms of nicotine, concerns about addiction belong more in the realm of moral objections than public health. Finally, and without any evidence, it has been claimed that vaping puts users more at risk from COVID-19. However, the scientific studies evaluating the number of COVID patients and comparing that with a statistically significant number of nicotine users show that that's not true. It's the opposite of it. Nicotine users, regardless of how they consume the nicotine, whether it be combustible cigarettes, whether it be electronic nicotine delivery systems, or snus or heated tobacco products, are underrepresented in COVID cases. Yes, it is true that if somebody who's a smoker gets COVID-19, they will more than likely have worse effects of COVID-19 because they've damaged their lungs over the years of using a combustible tobacco product. But it doesn't explain why they're underrepresented. Let's go talk more science. More science doesn't necessarily mean good science. More truth. I don't know how to take this. I don't know how to handle this. More truth. More science doesn't necessarily mean good science. Since 2010, there has been an explosion in the number of studies from all disciplines looking at all aspects of the use of safer nicotine products. An internet search reveals that from 2007 to 2012, only 53 scientific papers were published on vaping. By 2020, the numbers of published papers covering all types of safer nicotine products had risen to over 6,000. Unfortunately, many of these studies suffer from methodological flaws derived from confirmation bias. Laboratory studies which do not reflect real world of vaping, methodologies inappropriate to the study proposal, associations presented as causal when they're not, and recommendations for policy which have little or no relation to the study outcomes. One famous recent example of confirmation bias resulted in a journal retraction was a study from the University of California claiming vaping caused heart problems among those who were ex-smokers, until it was revealed that these heart problems predated their vaping. Oh, I need a drink. And yes, that's coffee. There are two overlapping, let me back up. Tobacco harm reduction further undermined. Misleading claims of teenage vaping epidemic, the tragic vaping deaths caused by illicit THC, and the advent of COVID-19 have all been readily exploited by anti-tobacco harm reduction actors from grassroots U.S. campaigners through to national and international medical and public health agencies. There are two overlapping sociological concepts at play. One is the role of the moral entrepreneur who seeks to impose their own standpoints on society at large, and the second is heuristic, or again, confirmation bias, whereby the public and the press don't bother to check information, but simply accept it on the basis of their gut reaction or previous experiences. Moral entrepreneurs can be individuals, religious groups, or formal organizations who press for the creation or enforcement of their normative view of the world. Such individuals or groups also hold the power to generate moral panic by expressing the conviction that a threatening social evil exists, and that must be combated, and they are not concerned with the means of achieving their desired outcome. Yeah, we see that all the time. Any advocate for tobacco harm reduction constantly runs into this social bias. These hypocrites, these elitists who want the world to operate within their normal environment, their parameters, They're so out of touch with the common folk. But they don't care. They'd rather make fun of them than actually address any problems that truly do exist. Moral panics. Yeah. The big Avali scare. Except there was no press about the fact that none of it had anything to do with nicotine vaping. Moral panics. The anti-tobacco harm reduction narrative is that the whole enterprise is a conspiracy on the part of the tobacco industry to create a new generation of nicotine addicts to compensate for the falling cigarette sales. In this narrative, little concern is shown for current smokers whose problems are considered to be self-inflicted, leaving them two options: quit or die. One of the many dangerous repercussions of overheated and misleading rhetoric about safer nicotine products has been the increase in the number of smokers, and also non-smokers and those living with smokers, who now believe safer nicotine products are no safer than cigarettes and may even be more dangerous. The anti-tobacco harm reduction activist academics and officials are believed to be in possession of accurate information and make it available to the public and the media, who in turn are unlikely to check or challenge the information. There is general apathy towards the tobacco industry, and many non-smokers will view vaping as the same as smoking, either based on existing prejudices or gut reactions, and or because they see people exhaling clouds of smoke in public. That is not smoke. And for those people that make an avid attempt at trying to understand vaping, they call that water vapor. And technically, from a scientific standpoint, the reason why that is relatively accurate is because everything that goes into e-juice for these devices is water soluble. And the reason Avali happened is because vitamin E is oil. It's, relatively speaking, an oil-based substance. And when you inhale evaporated oil, aerosolized oil, it causes lipoid pneumonia. And if you look at all the x-rays that they published about Avali, and you compare that to industrial situations where people got lipoid pneumonia, the x-rays are identical. The damage to the lung cells are identical. It has nothing to do with this because everything in this is water soluble. And the reason why people describe it as a water vapor, even though there is no water in it. Let's continue. I'm having a great time today. I don't think I've ever read a paper like this in my life, ever. One hand washes the other. Actions against the range of safer nicotine products and nicotine per se are conveniently conflated under a banner of tobacco control, which in most countries has public support. Yeah? And it has no business being under tobacco control. It's the opposite of what tobacco is. It gets people to stop using tobacco. This has allowed activist NGOs and academics to attract substantial funding from anti-tobacco multi-billionaire Michael Bloomberg. Yeah. We've talked about him. Little shark in the water. And through Bloomberg Philanthropies, beneficiaries include U.S.-based NGOs such as the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, another hypocrisy organization, Vital Strategies, and a UK-based reporting agency, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Tell me this isn't 1984. Which uses Bloomberg funds to publish anti-tobacco harm reduction stories. Bloomberg also contributed $160 million to the U.S. campaign aimed at a general ban on flavored nicotine liquids. Beyond the U.S., Bloomberg funds the International Union Against Lung Disease and Tuberculosis, known as the Union. And in the UK, the University of Bath is funded to manage anti-tobacco harm reduction activities through tobacco tactics and STOP. More 1984 acronyms. Whose modus operandi is to launch ad hominem attacks against tobacco harm reduction advocates. For those of you that don't know any Latin or have never seen these words before, what they're basically saying is they are personal attacks on the advocates. They don't worry about what the advocate is saying or how true the advocate is in what he has to present. They simply personally attack that person, make him look bad to discredit him so that people don't pay attention to what they have to say. The World Health Organization Tobacco Free Initiative also enjoys substantial financial support from Bloomberg, where the funds these days appear to be deployed in persuading member states to legislate against safer nicotine products. Ironically, the beneficiaries of such a strategy will be the multinational tobacco industry, for whom safer nicotine products represent less than 10% of overall turnover. In fact, tobacco shares in the U.S. and India rose in response to news of proposed bans on safer nicotine products in those countries. Wow. Global regulatory responses. At the top of the global regulatory tree sits the World Health Organization, FCTC, signed and ratified by 182 countries in the EU Tobacco Products Directive, which is concerned with many aspects of tobacco and safer nicotine product regulation within the European Union. Every 2 years, the FCTC holds a conference of the parties to review the working of the FCTC, attended by signatory state delegates and the approved non-governmental organizations belonging to the Framework Convention Alliance. The next meeting was due to be held in November 2020, but has now been postponed until 2021. This meeting excludes many organizations who support tobacco harm reduction. They leave them out. Or who have received any funding directly or indirectly from tobacco companies. Well, that kind of makes sense. However, why they exclude tobacco harm reduction is because they keep lumping tobacco harm reduction and tobacco in the same boat, even though they're mortal enemies. When you pick up a flavorful vape, you will have zero desire to pick up anything related to tobacco. In fact, you'll shy away from it, and you will become a fierce opponent to it in most cases. Personally, the friends that I have that still smoke, if they want to smoke, let them smoke. However, I will never have anything to do with tobacco ever again. Let's continue reading this. The EU TPD is undergoing a review, and its report is due out in May 2021. A significant input into the evaluation will be the report prepared by the EU Scientific Committee on Health, Environmental, and Emerging Risks. The EU review will feed into the deliberations of the COP, where the FCTC Secretariat which administers the treaty, has already been pushing COP delegates to consider advocating more draconian, safer nicotine product legislation. Yeah. Somebody who isn't voted into a position but delegated into the position should have no preconceived notions on what they're trying to do. If your job is to take advice from all the represented parties, you should listen to what all the represented parties have to say before you formulate a plan of action and a determined course for your actions. That's obviously not is what's happening right now. How do I know that? Because the likely battleground will be over the banning of most flavors. This attack on tobacco harm reduction can be seen in the light of the overall failure of the World Health Organization, FCTC, and signatory states to control the smoking epidemic and the politically impossible approach of banning the sale of tobacco. Only Bhutan has banned tobacco sales, but this is widely ignored. Much is made of new legislation in place in many countries, but LMIC have little of the administrative and judicial structures in place to enforce legislation. Many such countries have internal tensions between government departments where the domestic tobacco industry is both an important export commodity and a major source of internal revenue. From a public health point of view, many LMIC will have more immediate concerns about infectious disease control than health problems caused by smoking. As just a quick reminder to you, LMIC stands for Low and Moderate Income Countries. In other words, the poor countries have better things to worry about than how many people are smoking. Global picture remains mixed. The gradations of safer nicotine product control are complex and differ widely between countries. The gsthr website has a comprehensive breakdown of the legislative regime in each country. While control responses around the world are mixed, the emphasis is moving towards a more prohibitionist approach. There seems little doubt that anti-tobacco harm reduction hyperbole from the U.S. has had a global influence on policymakers and legislatures. It remains the case that 85 countries have no specific law or regulation regarding nicotine vaping products, and 75 countries regulate the sale of nicotine vaping products. 36 have bans, which fortunately is down from the original 39 that they reported in 2018. The moves towards encouraging a flavor ban would severely damage the uptake of vaping, as the availability of flavors is an important determinant in encouraging smokers to switch and stay away from cigarettes. Yeah. It was the flavoring that made vaping work for me. And it's the flavors that keep me using this, that keep me from going back to combustible cigarettes. There's no nicotine in this. It's the flavor that keeps me using it. If all I saw was vapor and tasted nothing, why would I do this? There would be no enjoyment out of it. Some good news, though. Despite attempts by anti-tobacco harm reduction activists to undermine its position on safer nicotine products, Public Health England reaffirmed that vaping plays an important role in helping smokers to quit, and consequently, health professionals need training in the use of vaping devices. Well, yeah. Do they get trained in how to use the technology that reads people's pacemakers and adjusts them? Or do you just hand them the device and say, Oh, Margaret's in there. She needs her pacemaker checked and calibrated. Why don't you go do it? Of course you have to train the health professionals. More common sense. Unfortunately, it needs to be stated. Sad day. Sad days ahead. Vaping was specifically mentioned as part of the UK Department of Health target to go smoke-free by 2030. Australian government officials remain in lockstep over continued de facto prohibition. However, in January 2020, after careful review of the evidence, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners published new Australian smoking cessation guidelines in January 2020. The guidelines cautiously endorse vaping nicotine as a quitting aid for smokers who have been unable to quit with the other available therapies. But only if they request help from their doctor to start vaping, and only if they get a prescription to possess nicotine. This aligns with the 2018 decision by the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists to acknowledge vaping as less risky than smoking. While the Royal Australasian College of Physicians now accepts the value of vaping as part of a cessation strategy. Judiciaries in Switzerland, 2018, and Quebec in 2019 have ruled against respective government restrictions on safer nicotine products, while the New Zealand government suffered its own judicial defeat in March of 2018. Yet, the New Zealand government and that of the Canadian federal government, if not necessarily the provinces, appears to be taking a more pragmatic and proportionate response to safer nicotine products than in many other countries. Even in the U.S., the Food and Drug Administration has recognized the value of tobacco harm reduction by giving marketing approval to heated tobacco product known as IQOS and snus as lower risk products over smoking. Sitting underneath the FDA decision is the substantial scientific and clinical evidence submitted by Philip Morris International for IQOS and Swedish Match USA for snus, which should attract more attention from the scientific and public health communities. But it doesn't. And you have to wonder why. The FDA came to its landmark decision based on this evidence, so it cannot be dismissed on the grounds of its industry providence. Tobacco harm reduction and the right to health. The notion of non-smokers' right to health, especially bystanders and children, underpinned tobacco control developments through the 1980s and 1990s. Those involved in the campaigns, especially in the U.S., saw themselves as warriors in relation to the passive smoking hazard, battling the economic and political interest of tobacco companies. Backed by the evidence of the palpable damage caused by smoking and the increased efforts to ban public smoking, campaigners seized the moral high ground as smokers became the new social pariahs. Targets. The tables have turned. Those whose rights now need protecting are those who want to avoid smoking and instead use safer products. Harm reduction as a social movement arose from the work of drugs and HIV activists who focused on the right to health, with nobody left behind. However, smokers are being left behind, primarily those on low incomes living in poverty and deprivation around the world, with no attractive and effective exit route out of smoking. Who smoke the most and consequently suffer most from smoking-related disease and death. The whole panoply of marginalization, decriminalization, and isolation accounts for the very high smoking rates, with indigenous and LGBTQ plus communities, those in prison, the homeless, and those suffering mental health, drug, and alcohol problems. Women are another hidden population. Globally, fewer women smoke than men, especially in low and moderate income countries. Men are typically the main breadwinners, leaving more women at home caring for family. Losing an entire family income due to the death of a man from smoking-related disease throws women and their families into what might be an even more precarious economic situation. Yet the nobody left behind mantra has long been enshrined in international conventions and continues to be so. Harm reduction sits at the intersection between public health and human rights. Article 12 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on 16 December 1966, states, "The right of everyone to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health." That is an inalienable right. As a social justice cause advocating for people who are often amongst the most disadvantaged and marginalized in society, tobacco harm reduction merits its place as a human rights issue. Tobacco harm reduction offers a global opportunity for one of the most dramatic public health innovations ever to tackle a non-communicable disease. And minimal costs to governments. In a time of COVID-19, when public health and public finance systems are stretched to the breaking point and may not recover for some time, the imperative to drive forward with tobacco harm reduction has never been more urgent than it is today. The way forward. For the first time, there is now a wide range of positive inducements for people who switch from smoking rather than just disincentives. Tobacco harm reduction through safer nicotine products offers an unprecedented exit strategy that has been shown to be acceptable to smokers and minimal cost to governments. More like negligible costs. We just talked about this on the news yesterday. The FDA has spent over $600 million advocating against tobacco. While they do that, they constantly spread lies and false information. And now they're currently looking for somebody to spend another $900 million. And their whole initiative is pushing the agenda based on a study of mice that were given so much nicotine. I don't understand how the mice survived the experiment. Conclusions and recommendations. This report focuses on tobacco harm reduction and the benefits to public and individual health of having available, affordable, appropriate, and acceptable, safer alternatives to combustible tobacco products. It also focuses on the rights of smokers who need the opportunity to switch from smoking and those who have already chosen safer alternatives. I'm flabbergasted by this report. It is a comprehensive report that addresses all facets of tobacco harm reduction. Take a look at their conclusions. Nearly 8 million people die from smoking-related diseases every year. 80% of the world's smokers live in low and middle-income countries, but have the least access to affordable, safer nicotine products. A projected 1 billion people will die from smoking-related diseases by 2100. Smoking rates have fallen in more affluent countries for decades, but rates of decline are now slowing. Wonder why? Wonder if it has anything to do with all the bans and legislations and draconian laws and taxes that are putting on the single best way to quit smoking. The global number of smokers has remained unchanged at 1.1 billion since the year 2000. And in some poorer countries, this is set to rise due to population growth. The immediate way to reduce smoking-related deaths is to focus on current smokers. The evidence of safer nicotine products demonstrates that they are substantially safer than combustible tobacco, both for smokers and bystanders, and contribute to helping those wishing to stop smoking. The adoption of safer nicotine products has been consumer-driven with nil or minimal cost to governments. Nil or minimal cost to governments varies based upon location. And I understand in the UK, they allocate a certain proportion of their healthcare budget to safer nicotine products. But here in the United States, they do the opposite. They allocate budgets that drive people to start smoking, that drive people to try nicotine products where they would never have tried it before, because they wouldn't have even known about them. The United States government going into schools and constantly preaching about vaping is going to drive curiosity in the children. And that curiosity is going to foster interest where there otherwise would not have been any interest whatsoever. Progress in the adoption of safer nicotine products has been slow. We estimate 98 million people globally use safer nicotine products, including 68 million vapers, amounting to only 9% of smokers. And it's not even a percentage of the smokers as much as it is for every smoker, 100 smokers, there will only be 9 vapers. And it's fewer in low and middle income countries. So there is an urgent need to scale up tobacco harm reduction strategies and policies. Many well-funded national and international NGOs, public health agencies, and multilateral organizations incorrectly view tobacco harm reduction as a threat, rather as an opportunity. Many U.S. and U.S.-funded organizations have manufactured panics about young people and vaping, about flavors and the outbreak of lung disease, overshadowing the real public health challenge, which is to persuade adult smokers to quit. And if they can't quit, switch to a safer alternative, a safer nicotine product. Many U.S. and U.S.-funded organizations have manufactured panics about young people vaping. Yep. And the United States government is manufacturing more youth that are interested in vaping because of their campaign and because of their spending. The near monopoly on international tobacco control funding by U.S.-based foundations, known as philanthrocapitalism, Bill Gates spending his money as a philanthropist. You don't think that his businesses profit from his philanthropic activities? How about Michael Bloomberg? You don't think his pharmaceutical ventures benefit when he has these agencies go out and enact these draconian laws, that they go out and enact these draconian tax policies, you don't think that drives people towards his pharmaceutical companies, which are making the exact same product, but the product is now going to be under the umbrella of pharmaceutical controls? Why do you think he's pushing the agenda so hard in Australia? For them to follow a medicinal philosophy with regard to vaping. It's very easy to find his claws in the latest activities going on. The increasingly prohibitionist emphasis risks many consequences, including that current smokers may decide not to switch. Current users of safer nicotine products may go back to smoking, and the growth of unregulated and potentially unsafe products will continue because people think that this is just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than smoking deadly combustible cigarettes. They don't bother to stop for a moment to think about the fact that this doesn't emit anything dangerous unless you misuse it. And that's what a lot of the scientific studies have done to get the results they have. This cannot produce formaldehyde unless you misuse the product. If you take anything and combust it, you will create those compounds. But none of this fluid is ever combusted. It is heated only until it vaporizes. Once it vaporizes, the airflow extracts it from the combustion chamber. That wouldn't be a combustion chamber unless you held it and did not adequately provide enough airflow, which is what they do in these laboratories to come up with these studies to scare people away from vaping. Take any piece of wire and run enough current through it to get it to glow, and then immerse that glowing piece of metal in any substance. I don't care how healthy the substance is. And you will create unhealthy compounds. And measure those unhealthy compounds and then put that into a report. And that's exactly what they've been doing. The University of Bath and other places. All on Bloomberg's directives. There continues to be much poorly conducted research in science, which is then spun with the anti-tobacco harm reduction message. The World Health Organization's Empower initiative alone will be insufficient in hastening an end to smoking. The weakest area of achievement is O, offering help, which is also the most expensive for governments. However, when you have a solution that doesn't cost the governments anything, because people are more than willing to take the money that they were spending on tobacco products and go spend it on safer alternative products, where's that argument? Their only offering of help that they need to do is adopt a policy of tobacco harm reduction and not a moralistic or elitist agenda of giving people the choice of quit or die. Where's the humanitarian considerations there? Quit or die. Harm reduction is embedded in nearly every field of the World Health Organization except tobacco. By denying the role of tobacco harm reduction, the World Health Organization is working against the principles and practices enshrined in its own pledges for global health promotion and in international conventions relevant to the right of health, including in Article 1D of the FCTC. Richer countries have been the main beneficiaries of tobacco harm reduction, and many low and middle income countries are left behind through a combination of prohibitionist agendas and the availability of appropriate, acceptable, and affordable alternatives to combustible tobacco. Those most affected by tobacco control policies have been stigmatized and excluded from the policy conversation. Good public health engages affected populations. The slogan, "Nothing about us without us," is central to the tobacco harm reduction, and it is to any field in public health. I'm just going to leave the recommendations up there. I'm not going to actually read through it all. But this is a remarkable report. And this is just the executive summary. This is not the actual content of the report. This is a summary of all the content in this report. There's going to be a link in the description below. So if you're interested, you can download this PDF and read it for yourself. Or you can download it in multiple other formats. I'll show you at the very end. Here's Chapter 1. Smoking, the slow burning killer. Chapter 2. Market forces and consumers. Chapter 3. Not just the nicotine. Consumers speak. Older smokers and tobacco harm reduction. Clearing the smoke, safer nicotine products and health. Every single one of these pages is filled with citable academic sources from all around the globe. Chapter 5. Project Fear, the war against nicotine. Yeah. Chapter 6. The politics of health. Safer nicotine product regulation and control. Chapter 7. The right to health and the people that are left behind. Chapter 8. Burning issues. Conclusions, recommendations, and a way forward. And then the final annex. Estimation of the global number of vapers. Because, see, data is collected for tobacco usage, but there aren't as many countries that bother to gather information about something that's classified as a smoking product. They don't bother segregating the information to actually find out what's really going on. In some places, they gather data by going around one town in one city and asking maybe 100 people, and then try to correlate that to the entire population of a country. How can you accurately come up with numbers when your sample size is so small and reduced to one geographic area? There are so many factors that come into play in statistics. No statistician should ever accept that as reliable information. So, what did they do? They went around and they tried to gather as much information as they could from as many sources as they could. Because if you take a look at this map here, you'll notice yellow countries did ask the right questions by using national research from the government to come up with the actual numbers. And they asked all the questions that they needed to determine if somebody was using a vaping product. Was it a nicotine vaping product? Was it a THC vaping product? Was it a product that did not contain either of those substances, yet still aerosolized vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol? Was it a other classification? And if it was other, was it snus? Was it IQOS? Or was there something else that we haven't even heard about yet? The yellow countries broke it down and gathered all the data. The green countries, they got their data from Eurobarometer. where some information was accurate and competently assessed, and some of the information was just guesstimated. The red countries, they use the Global Adult Tobacco Survey. World Health Organization determines what countries get assistance in coming up with tabulated information, and what countries they just expect them to give them the information. And they rely wholeheartedly on it, because there are some countries that say, you're not coming in here to determine this. We're going to do it for ourselves, and you'll take our numbers and you'll like it. And then there's other parts of the world, like Europe, where they had no numbers to go off of, because the European Union hasn't done the study yet. Independent trade organizations have done that, but you can't rely on those trade organizations when you're trying to develop policy. It's kind of like how the tobacco industry is not allowed to help regulate the tobacco industry, and why they're not letting the vape industry regulate the vape industry anymore. They're trying to protect the health and safety of the population. Regardless, they did their best to gather as much information from the surveys to determine the actual number of users around the world. The number of vapers in 49 countries from which the survey data are derived is 40 million vapers. And they estimate that 17.8 million vapers live in the remaining 152 countries. This gives a total of 58.1 million vapers worldwide in 2018. And that's expected to grow. And it's going to grow substantially, regardless of whether these draconian laws are passed or not. Because just like we talked about yesterday, when Massachusetts decides that they're going to ban something, what are the Massachusetts residents going to do? If they really want that product, they'll get it from somewhere. They'll go to bordering states to get it. They'll order it from online. They'll order it from online in the United States. Or if they can't get it from the United States, they're going to order it from other countries. Because you can't open every single package. You can't examine every single package before it's delivered. So the products are going to get through. And for something that so successfully and easily helps people quit smoking, there's no stopping this train. This train's just going to get faster and bigger. Tobacco harm reduction. Policy that needs to be adopted universally, all across the globe. And if you're interested, and you're still watching this, and you want to download an actual copy for yourself, there'll be a link in the description below. It's available as a PDF, an EPUB, MOBI, HTML, multiple formats. And if you contact them, you can order printed copies of this report. The global state of tobacco harm reduction. Amazing literature. I hate to call it literature because people have such a negative connotation when it comes to using terminology like that. So I'll call it a simple report that has all the facts. One comprehensive document that you can take and fight any prohibitionist, because it has scientific data contained within it that is used to formulate the statements that are in that documentation, in that publication, in that article. So, I hope you enjoyed this content. I was planning on going further into this, but I know the people's attention span isn't what it is, or what it used to be. Any video that's more than 10 minutes long, people lose interest. But this matters. People's lives matter. How many lives can be saved with safer nicotine products? There's 1.1 billion smokers on the globe today. And if they don't switch to a safer nicotine product, they will die. And over half of them are going to die prematurely because of a smoking-related injury. How much suffering of these 1.1 billion people need to happen before somebody wises up and does the humanitarian thing and tells them, take this vape, try it to help you quit smoking, because you can add years to your life. You can add quality to the years that you have left in your life. It's truly that simple. Keep on vaping. And have a great day.